Hello and welcome to episode 208 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, but I'm only half of the mics on the podcast today, because joining me is Mike Salbato.
Yes, hello. You may know me from websites such as RPGFan.com.
And joining Mike and I is RPG Fan Reviews editor Jonathan Logan.
Hello.
So, listeners, you might notice that the subtitle for today's episode is Link's Awakening Revisited. And that's for a couple different reasons. First of all, this episode is all about Link's Awakening, the Game Boy Classic Zelda title from 1993. And also, this isn't the first time we're talking about it. We did a Link's Awakening episode that was just me and Chris, who has since left the website. Back in April of 2018 is when that episode posted as part of Zelda Month. But more current to Link's Awakening is that it very recently received a remake on the Nintendo Switch, and that remake was beautiful and well received, and I think worth discussing. So we are going to revisit Link's Awakening with a new panel, talk about why this game is cool and interesting and we love it, and also do so in context of this new Switch remake. So, rolling the clock back to 1993, gentlemen. Let's talk. What's your background with the original Link's Awakening, and how much do you like or love it? Starting with you, Mike.
A lot. Link's Awakening's always actually been near the top of my favorite Zelda games. It was kind of interesting at the time, like going from, because I'm old enough that of course I played it in 1993. So we saw like this progression of Zelda from the first two, and then you got to Super Nintendo, and then visually, anyway, it almost seemed backwards to go to Game Boy after that. But I loved that game so much. It was, anyone who had the original Game Boy knows the pain of trying to play in a car at night. Where you had the little light things, or you try to like catch a street light as you went by. But I could not put this game down when I played it back then.
And you mentioned going from the SNES to the Game Boy. Link's Awakening began life as a intended port of A Link to the Past, but very early in development, they quickly made it into something different. And some elements that they wanted in Link to the Past ended up being first done in Link's Awakening, like the visual of a mountain with an egg on top, and the idea of having a dungeon inside the mouth of a giant fish, were things that they had sort of penciled in for A Link to the Past, but ended up sort of moving over into Link's Awakening. But I think we even mentioned that in the previous Link's Awakening episode 18 months ago, which I didn't re-listen to for this podcast, but maybe I should have. Jonathan, what's your background with Link's Awakening?
Pretty much the same. I mean, I got my start with Zelda on the NES. I used to go over to my best friend's place, and he had a copy of the golden cartridge, and we used to play it, and never really getting anywhere. And then the SNES came out, and Link to the Past, I just devoured it as a kid. And then when I was in, I think it was Zeller's back then, I saw the box and asked my mom for it, and she knew how much I liked the other Legend of Zeldas, so she got it, and I got it for Game Boy. And it was quickly one of my favorite games, certainly my favorite game on that system.
Right on. And, well, my story is pretty similar to both of yours. I guess we're all around the same age, at least in our late 20s or early 30s. My first Zelda game was the first Zelda for the NES, and I didn't have a Super Nintendo until late, but I had a Game Boy very early, and I think Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game I finished, and it was really what kickstarted my enjoyment of the Zelda series the most over the years. It was I think after I finished it, I finally got a Super Nintendo and got to play A Link to the Past for myself, and then played the other ones on Game Boy, and I never had an N64. So for many years, my Zelda experience was A Link to the Past and the three Zelda games for the Game Boy. And I don't think I played this the year it came out. It probably wasn't until 94 or 95. But it took me over a year to finish because I was stuck at Eagle's Tower for something like 6 or 7 months.
Oh yeah.
In my defense, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and I met a school friend who was oddly enough a lifelong friend who I've known for more than 20 years, and we became friends in 4th grade because we were both stuck in Link's Awakening and would help each other with it. Uh, and then that same friend, a few years later, when we were both in middle school, we bought opposite versions of the two Oracle games for the Game Boy Color, and then we traded copies to play the second half of the story.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I think we both eventually got our own copies of the game we were missing, but that is how I first played them. I played Oracle of Seasons and then traded for her copy of Oracle of Ages, and we would talk about it in homeroom every day. So anyway, like that is my first few years of Zelda fandom on the Game Boy, and Link's Awakening is very special to me. It's not my favorite Zelda game, but it's certainly in my top 4 or 5, and it's so it does a few things that are so unique and weird, even looking back at it 25 plus years ago, that it feels pretty special. And because it had been so long, like I guess, what is it, something like, my math might be off, but is it 26 years since the Game Boy version, and then maybe 21 years since the Game Boy Color DX version? Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that this remake was warranted. It's not like they did a remake 2 years after it came out. And this remake is also really cool and beautiful.
Oh, it's great. Something about the Zelda series like gets people really talking when there's a new visual style that some people really love it and some people don't. It happened with Wind Waker. I think it's great. I think the miniature look works really well for this world.
People compared the sprite look to Fisher-Price toys, and while I get that, it's also really, really cute. And very expressive, and the way from the sprites move to even the way that the scenes transition feels just I don't know. It's very appealing to me, and maybe the most appealing of all is they've barely changed anything. This preserves the content of the original pretty remarkably.
It's very surprising. Yeah, it's an interesting approach. Like block for block, it is the same game.
Yeah, block for block, and dungeon room for dungeon room, it's the same game, except there are a few more hidden items like seashells and heart pieces, and I think the contents of a few chests have changed. Other than that, and the Dampé's dungeon building side quest, I think nothing else has changed. At least visually and with items on the screen, there have been mechanical changes, and there's 360-degree motion and important things like that. But just content-wise and placement-wise, it's almost exactly the same.
What I find remarkable about that too is when playing through the game, it has a ton of content. This doesn't feel like a bare bones game, and it came out on Game Boy in 1993, and the amount of it really puts in perspective just the amount of content they shoved into that cartridge way back then, that it still today holds up as, wow, this is a full-fledged game.
Yeah, it's 8.5 dungeons, and probably in the 13 to 15 hours range if you don't really go berserk collecting everything. But this is a dense game for being 1993, and again playing it in 2019, it still felt dense. And it does the classic Zelda thing of you can feel the world expand a little bit every time you reach a new story point or get a new item that lets you travel further.
Right.
And I think that Link's Awakening communicates that really well. It's like, oh, now I have the Roc's Feather. Now I can finally jump over all these pits I've been seeing. Oh,
it's such a great mechanic.
Yeah, it's like Zelda sort of maybe originated it. Like Miyamoto said that when he made Mario, he wanted to make a game about getting to a goal quickly. I mean, when he made Zelda, he wanted to make a game about exploring a space and progressing sort of like non-linearly instead of linearly. And I think that concept is done very well in many of the Zelda games, but in Link's Awakening in particular does like a super good job of it. Like even just going from, I don't know, like Pegasus Boots to Hookshot to Flying Rooster, you feel that the pits that you can traverse across grow wider and wider. And right. I don't want to use the M word, but many Metroid and Castlevania games sort of borrowed that idea of nonlinear exploration in a way that I think is also pretty powerful. But back to what's changed in the remake, I think that the visual upgrade is astounding. Just like asset to asset, everything looks just really colorful and beautiful. People are sort of complaining about it being too cute, but people complained about Wind Waker, and then 3 years later, everyone wished that there were more games like Wind Waker. So I'm not
Exactly.
worried. Yeah, I'm not worried about that.
I think the criticism about that's going to die off pretty quick. I mean, it's what amazes me about it is just how okay, you Fisher Price toy. I don't think it quite looks that kitty, but just how alive the world seems while at the same time being so artificial and sculpted is kind of amazing to me. They did an amazing job with the visual design in this, unlike any other game I can really think of.
Right. I'm sure we probably all did this to some extent, but I spent some time inside a lot of the houses. Like, there's so much detail in the houses now, which I think is really neat. Like, just stuff sitting on tables in the corner, and it's really cool.
Oh yeah, it was already a game that was packed full of Easter eggs, and they just shoved even more of them into the Switch version. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's fewer empty spaces, even little details like just the way the grass moves and the way that there's small details like just things moving in the background. When you Pegasus boot charge into the wall of a house, like things on tables will shake too instead of just having the screen rattle in an artificial way.
Oh shoot, I didn't see that actually.
I don't think it's true of every single asset, but at least it was like something on Mr. Wright's desk I think moved. But there's also a lot of remixed audio in addition to the visual upgrade because I think that maybe music is more important to Ocarina of Time than any other game within the series. But I was really excited to hear a new arrangement or at least a new instrumentation of Ballad of the Windfish because I think that's one of the signature music pieces of the whole series.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean this is the game that introduced the flute, unless I missed my guess.
Nope. A lot. Link to the Past did, and it's called.
Of course it did.
Yeah, it's called. They call it flute in A Link to the Past, but it's clearly an ocarina. So this is the second game with an ocarina, but the ocarina is more important to Link's Awakening than it is to A Link to the Past because
you actually get songs.
Yeah, you actually get multiple songs, and Ballad of the Windfish is extremely important to the plot of the story. Even though the other two songs are great too, it's when you learn Monbo's Mambo from the giant Monbo fish, just the way his eyes spin when he's performing.
Oh yes.
Yeah, this game is so weird with its goofy details. But the music changes are important, and we're going to talk about Ballad of the Windfish soon. But there's also a couple mechanical changes I didn't mention. There's more warp points because in the old version. If you played Mambo's song, you could use it to escape from a dungeon or teleport to the pond, and then there was 4 warp points that you could sort of cycle between by jumping into. But they added more. I think now there's 6 or 7 warp points. I might have even missed 1 or 2. And when you play Mambo's song, you can teleport to the pond or any of those, let's say, 7 warp points, and that just makes fast travel a lot easier and better. But maybe most important of all the mechanical changes is the Switch has, I don't know, 10 or 12 surface buttons instead of the Game Boy's 4.
Yes, exactly.
And maybe the most annoying or frustrating part of the original Link's Awakening is having to switch between your items attached to the A and B buttons often. Like, I don't know, you would have to equip the Pegasus Boots and the Rock's Feather to jump across a pit of 3. That would leave you defenseless to deal with enemies on the other side, so you would maybe pause, switch to Shield and Sword, or Sword and Bow or something, and then deal with the enemies. With the button layout here, you have your action button A communicating the power bracelet, among other things. And then you have your sword permanently on B, your shield permanently on R, and your Pegasus Boots permanently on L. And then your X and Y buttons freed up for the other tools. So with the Game Boy version, you can never have more than 2 items equipped at the same time. But under normal circumstances, you'll have 6 plus equipped at the same time on the Switch version, and that just makes everything way easier.
Back on the Game Boy, what were your usual item setups like your default?
It was Rock's Feather and Sword. Just the ability to jump offensively or defensively. You could jump to the rear of an enemy that had an armored front. Pits were very common obstacles, so just being able to jump around felt natural and useful. And the sword is not the most powerful weapon in the game, but it's it's sort of your staple weapon.
Yeah, it's dangerous to go alone.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I mean, I applaud them for what they did on the Game Boy one. Like, that was pretty inventive because
Oh,
The only
yeah.
other thing they could have done was left the sword and have
It
one
wasn't
item that can swap out.
yeah, it wasn't a bad system, but I mean, it felt less and less okay, as you get further away from 1993, and
Right.
and having this system, which is not that different from A Link to the Past or A Link Between Worlds, like felt like a very logical change, and even though it makes the game easier, it just makes you feel more powerful and the game feel more modern. It's awesome.
Right. You don't have to go into the menu nearly as much, which is
Yeah.
great.
I have to say, I love the menu in this game. It's interesting to me how they very reminiscent of Breath of the Wild, how the menu design is in the remake version.
Right.
They've really taken that design language and put it on top of Link's Awakening, which I think was smart.
Yeah, I think they've gotten better and better with menu economy as the Zelda series goes on. Like even the Zelda games I don't love from the 2000s, mostly thinking about Spirit Tracks here. Like even in those, the menu design is always very, very logical, filling most of the screen and making it very easy to go between managing your inventory to viewing your quest items to viewing your save load detail stuff. Like Zelda has always been good at menus, and this is just another good Zelda menu.
Right.
Oh, one other thing they added to the Link's Awakening remake that I didn't mention before, where you get bottles in this game.
Yeah, which, I mean, I'll admit that I did die twice due to foolish mistakes, but it's not really the hardest game, so for the most part, you probably don't need them. But it's a neat addition. It makes it feel more in line with the other Zeldas now.
You have to be careful, though. Bottles don't auto-revive you in this one.
That's true.
Yeah, you do get the auto-revive ointment from, what's her name? Crazy Tracy.
Tracy, yeah.
Yeah, but basically, it's just an extra means to heal, and the game already had fairies and many large and small fairies in this game, so just almost every other Zelda game has bottles. They just added some bottles in normal, easy to understand places. I didn't object to it.
No,
I kind of do object to that to having to play some Dampe mini games to get one of them though.
Yeah.
I haven't finished all those yet.
I haven't.
I've done maybe about half of them. I just got a heart piece from one, and I decided, you know what, this is enough. I hope there aren't any ultimate items near the end of the side quest because I'm basically done.
I have to admit that was a bit of a sad point for me is when the big reward for the seashells being a tile for.
Oh, it is. Oh,
it is. Oh my gosh!
It's a tile. The second item is the better sword.
Yeah, I got that far at least.
I didn't get that. I got about 25 or 30 secret seashells, and I know if I put in more of an effort, I could have gotten enough for the sword. Because I think in the original there was 25 or 30, and then for this game there are 50 total.
Yeah, but none of them are missable this time, which is nice.
Yes, it's a little bit more sensibly designed that way. But I didn't explore enough to get the sword. I think I was probably high 20s at the end of the game, but. That is a bit of a bummer. That's just more tiles for level 50. They should have done a little bit better.
I think they really overestimated the popularity of this particular feature to the point where they were like, okay, the big reward has to be, the thing that makes the dungeon editor even better instead of the sword, which everyone wants. Everyone wants a better sword as your ultimate.
Exactly.
And truthfully, I don't hate this dungeon editor. It's a really great idea because again, the dungeons in this game are all square blocks that you can arrange in some insane polygon in a map. So making a dungeon editor to Frankenstein dungeon rooms together, I think is a neat idea, and it's worth exploring. But it just became tedious going through those challenges.
Yeah,
and having some meaningful content locked behind those challenges. Like seashells and heart pieces and I think one bottle. That was a bit of a bummer because it's cool. It's fun to mess around in the dungeon editor, but it's way less fun to do. Oh, I don't know, 7 to 12 of those challenges in the dungeon editor.
Have you guys ever seen the Game Maker's Toolkit Boss Keys series?
No.
Oh, it's so good. It's just this guy. He delves into every single Zelda game and explores the dungeon, and he breaks down the dungeon into like different things. There's I can't remember there's a gauntlet, there's a puzzle box. But the problem I feel with the dungeon editor in this is it just makes every single dungeon into a gauntlet. There's no key items. There's no way. There's no flow to the dungeons. It's literally just you start at the beginning, you plow through until you get to the very end of it, and you beat a boss you've already beaten. But there's no new item.
Almost. They count the number of locks you have, and so your first X number of chests will always be the number of keys in the dungeon, and the final chest will always be the nightmare key. So you have to collect every chest and then just hustle to the end, which is a pattern that again does not have the richness and design detail of having a key dungeon tool that you have to find that defines the other work in your dungeon, or even or even something like A Link Between Worlds, which does not have items hidden in dungeons, but does have each dungeon themed around the use of a certain item.
There's no key mechanic in these dungeons. I mean, you can occasionally put in a switch if you want to switch the blue and orange blockades, but that's pretty much the extent of.
You have locked doors, staircases, and the orange and blue switch. That's about it.
I mean, I guess the puzzle is putting the dungeon together according to the criteria you're given. But actually, to be honest, I found that part a little bit fun. I kind of liked that part. But then eventually it was just become, I got to play through this dungeon. And it would be mismatched, and it would be, like you said, Frankenstein together. There'd be no central mechanic. There would be no theme. It was just random room until you get to the boss, and you've already beaten the boss.
And you've already beaten every room in that dungeon before. I mean, it's a fun idea, and it's fun to play around with it a little bit. But having it's not mandatory at all, which is the right choice. But still having collectibles that people will want locked behind doing several of these challenges, I think made it less fun. And it's really the only major content change in the game that isn't related to mechanics or menus, or collectibles. So, like, I'm not saying I wanted more out of this remake, because I think the visual and audio upgrade is more than enough, and the mechanical upgrade is practically a revelation. But I don't know. I just don't have the most love for this for the Danpei side quest.
I'm really hoping it doesn't actually throw Nintendo off the idea of creating a full-fledged
Zelda Maker.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the brilliant behind Mario Maker, is that you actually have access to everything in a Mario game, so you can create your own levels. Whereas this is nothing like that. This is you're just piecing, like you said, Frankensteining together already played pre-made blocks. So I have trouble of thinking about this as a Zelda Maker even prototype.
No, it's not a. It's a Link's Awakening dungeon editor, not a true Zelda Maker. And if they made a Zelda dungeon maker that was, I don't know, to the level of detail and creativity of what people can do with Mario Maker, that would be a real mind blow of a game, and something I'd be very interested in. And I shy away from sort of content creation games like that. This will baffle Mike, and I apologize in advance, but I'm a big Dragon Quest fan, and I'm just not interested in building games, so I haven't even played a Dragon Quest Builders game for 30 minutes. But because this kind of game is, and I've also never played Minecraft, this kind of game just doesn't interest me a ton. But I mean, Zelda Dungeon Maker, that would tip the scale a little bit. but this is not a true Zelda Dungeon Maker. This is a Link's Awakening dungeon editor that is sort of foisted into a side quest that isn't always fun.
No, a dungeon remixer.
Sure, yeah. Dungeon Mixer. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Zelda Dungeon Mixer. That's that's like the free version of Dungeon Maker. You have to pay for the mixer to maker upgrade.
It's funny. It didn't. Although I agree with you 100%, it was tedious, and there were a few unlockables behind it. It thankfully didn't really hurt my enjoyment of the game at all, because there's already so much in Link's Awakening that I didn't feel like I need to 100% this and get this done. Like I could 100% everything else and still get a feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah, I didn't feel let down by the Danpei side quest. I just I only had so much stamina for it, and after I did a couple things and got a couple collectibles, I decided I was done, and that was fine. But it's just I don't know. It's not the fully realized dungeon maker that I think some people may want, and as a side quest, it didn't hold my interest for that long. I don't want to seem too down on this because of one optional side quest even. But it's sort of funny. We're mentioning how the dungeons are all composed of square blocks, and that was true in the Game Boy original and the Switch remake. But in the Game Boy original, the overworld was always also entirely square blocks. But for the remake, they make it a little bit more fluid. Like you sort of semi-smoothly transition from space to space in the Switch remake that used to be a block by block arrangement in the Game Boy version. And there's some not really load times, but like some tearing and some slowdown when you transition scenes.
Yeah,
and I played this game at least 80% handheld, but that was the most technical difficulties I ever encountered in my whole play.
They just wanted a spiritual successor to the screen, like freezing and like jumping over.
Right.
Like,
oh yeah, it was a built-in limitation. They wanted this to feel slightly slow and janky, even though it's 2019. No, they probably wanted it to be perfectly seamless, and it just isn't totally seamless. But I don't know. That's the biggest complaint I've heard just from the online chatter surrounding Link's Awakening. But we've talked a lot about the remake and the new stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the old stuff. Link's Awakening, both in every version of the game. Again, the Switch remake is very faithful. Link is on a voyage for undetermined reasons and ends up washed ashore the island of Koholint, which I think I accidentally called Kolohint at least 8 times in the first episode that we did 18 months ago. It's Koholint. And on Koholint Island, he meets a young woman named Marin and a bunch of other people living in Mabe Village, and also an owl that tells him that the only way to escape the island is to wake the windfish. And this owl guides Link through exploring the island and conquering its 8 key dungeons, at the end of which each dungeon has a musical instrument, with the idea of forming an octet of these musical instruments to play in front of a giant egg on top of a mountain, which is, again, a very striking key visual in this game. And then, entering the egg to wake up the sleeping. It's very dirty inside that egg. To wake the sleeping windfish. I think this is maybe less of a shock now than it was when I was 8 or 9 playing this game in 1994 or 95. But as you play through the game and speak to both the monsters and the human denizens of Koholint, they say some sort of suspicious things. Like the monsters will be like, "No, you can't end this. No, when the windfish wakes up, everything is going to be gone." And then the villagers are thinking things like, "Outside the island? What do you mean outside the island? And what do you mean when the windfish wakes? The windfish has always been asleep." And you sort of realize that you're trapped in some kind of dream, but to break free, the dream will disappear, just like when you dream as a person, the dream that you had sort of disappears and becomes forgotten, which puts a little bit of a pall over the whole game. Like and this isn't a late game revelation right before the final boss. You start hearing this around, I don't know, the dungeon 3 or 4 or 5 range, right?
Something like that. I mean, the big reveal is before dungeon 6, but there's some like hints before that.
When you're in the ruins, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ruins before the face shrine, but
right.
the bosses that you meet comment like that before it becomes more explicit in the space between Dungeon 5 and Dungeon 6. But I remember thinking, being more shocked by this in when I was a kid, where now there's obviously more breadcrumbs around. But isn't that a sort of a dark and weird concept for a 1993 Game Boy game? Or am I looking at the world of 26 years ago a little bit too fondly?
I mean, when you look at the other 3 Zelda games that came before this, obviously, pretty light on plot, and although they did expand it greatly with Link to the Past, it's still a pretty traditional, rescue Zelda. And then they took a really hard left in this and just threw in a lot of story that was there.
Yeah, no Zelda in this game, and Ganon is sort of emulated but never mentioned as part of the final boss. And but it's weird, a Zelda game with no Zelda and no true Ganon.
No, and kind of a narrator type of character who guides you through the game, where that really wasn't the case in any of the other ones. The owl.
Yes, Mr. Owl, who
right.
has interesting ideas on how to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop. But and
which
really,
I'm gonna say the best owl, because future owls never trusted you to understand anything they said, and made you listen to them repeated times when you accidentally hit the wrong thing. This owl was like, here, I'm just going to tell you something, and I know you're going to understand it.
And also, you can, both in the old version and the new version, although it's easier in the new version, you could go in, by going to the map area where you met the owl, you can repeat parts of dialogue if there was anything that you forgot. And I also should mention the map in the Switch version, they add a lot more details. You can even, like, zoom in on finer details on what was in a previous dungeon room and what was in a previous area of the overworld. In the Catfish Maw dungeon, you have to fight this Master Stalfos mini-boss 4 times. And in the old version of the game, you can only know which room to go in by the number of discolored tiles in that room. Like the third time you fought him, you had to go to the room with 3 tiles. Yeah. And that's true in the Switch version as well. But in the Switch version, once you have the dungeon map, you can go around, you can just look at the map and see a miniature version of each room, and look it up that way. There's just more sensible navigation and more breadcrumbs in the to follow in the Switch version. But back to the owl, I think this is probably the best owl in Nintendo history until Rowlet was introduced in 2017. Or maybe it was 2016. The Zelda and Pokemon timelines are crossing. But the narrative felt sophisticated and even a little dark for a 1993 Game Boy game. And
especially given how little dialogue there was in the game itself. It communicated a very complex moral quandary. There's very little effort, really. Yeah, there's. I don't want to say little dialogue. I think there's maybe more dialogue in this game than in A Link to the Past. Actually, that's probably untrue. But this seems a little dialogue heavy for a Game Boy game, and it's definitely more story than I was used to seeing in a Zelda game.
Yeah, I think that's what's really surprising, because we keep saying for a Game Boy game, but
right,
because at the time when something came over to Game Boy, obviously they had to compromise a lot of things. So we were used to seeing things like kind of like stripped down to like just their essentials on Game Boy, and somehow they actually upped the story from even over the Super Nintendo game.
Yeah.
Like Link's Awakening, that was not something we expected on a handheld.
Well, Link's Awakening feels like a sequel. It doesn't feel like a port. It doesn't feel like a shrunken down version. It feels like a genuine sequel to the mechanics and everything that makes Link to the Past so good.
Right.
Yeah, A Link to the Past, I think, was a bit of a bigger game, just because of like number of dungeons and map size and things and like what you would call quote unquote content in a Zelda game. But Link's Awakening fit right in alongside the others, because I mean it was like Zelda 1 and 2 in that there were 8 dungeons and a lot of items and a lot of items to collect, but it felt more sophisticated than the previous 3 Zelda games because of this weird tone and focus to the story that was unlike any of the previous 3. It's as content rich and detailed as any of the previous Zelda games, just with concessions made here or changes made here because of the limitations of the Game Boy. But it was breathtaking and beloved in either maybe because of, maybe in spite of, its Game Boy status. And I think the Switch version is basically just proves this game was awesome all along, but now it's maybe more appealing and more accessible because of these mechanical and visual changes, which makes me all the happier for the Switch games. So I'm thinking of maybe one journalist in particular. I think some people avoided the original Game Boy Link's Awakening because it was on the Game Boy, because they're averse to games with 2D graphics or black and white graphics or Game Boy games in general. That excuse is gone now, and a lot of people are re-experiencing a lot of positive nostalgia from this Switch remake, and maybe some people are discovering this game for the first time because it's on a very current system and they have fewer hangups to get in their way. But I mean, I'm speaking in a little bit of a bubble here because all 3 of us love the original version and the new version of this game. This is not a roast podcast. This is a celebratory podcast.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm just curious. Did either of you pull out the original Link's Awakening after you finished the Switch version just to play around with it a little bit?
No, I played the original Link's Awakening about a year and a half ago for this
podcast.
Yeah, of course. So it was pretty fresh in my memory.
It was pretty cool. My partner, she has a she still has a Game Boy Color, and she has a copy of Link's Awakening DX. So I pulled it out of a drawer and I started playing it. I discovered that her save file was in Eagle's Tower.
Oh boy,
you know, your favorite. Yeah, woohoo.
I mean, I was able to beat Eagle's Tower in an afternoon this time, but it gave me so many problems as a child that I have a bit of a complex about it. I'm not going to deny it.
No, it's it's the trickiest dungeon in the game by far.
And Turtle Rock, I think, is maybe it's a more intense dungeon, just because there's more rooms, and the gimmick of that is just remembering which staircases are which, and finding the one switch room that you have to deal with. I don't know. I think it's maybe more. I think Turtle Rock challenges your dexterity more, and Eagle's Tower challenges your puzzle solving ability more. And it was just a little much for me as an 8-year-old in 1994.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about this was, I mean, I just started the game up, and it was at the end of the game, so I was Link. I had almost all of my power-ups and all of my items, and it felt like the same game. There were the slight annoyances, like having to unequip my sword and shield and re-equip other weapons, but it still felt it still felt, the tone of it was the exact same. It was still fun. It actually amazed me, because as I was playing the remake, sometimes you play a remake and you kind of like, oh, this is exactly how I remember it. But the reality is, it's not exactly how you remember it. It's you're kind of looking at the game through nostalgia goggles, and they've upgraded things. But in this particular case, the original still holds up exceptionally well, in my opinion. I was having as much fun playing through Eagle's Tower as you possibly could playing through Eagle's Tower on the Game Boy Color as I was on the Switch. Now, I didn't play. I beat the dungeon, and that was pretty much it. But it was just an interesting experience going back and seeing where it came from. Also, it gave me some hope, because it means that I can still play Oracle of Seasons and Ages without thinking, oh, this is tedious.
Yeah, I also played Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages last year. I played one new Zelda game for the first time and replayed 6 others in 2018. About half before and half after that Zelda month that we recorded for the podcast. And interestingly, I did replay Link's Awakening DS on my old Game Boy Advance, but for the 2 Oracle games, and this is available for Link's Awakening DX as well, but I didn't do that. You can get them on the 3DS eShop. And that is maybe the best way to play them in 2019, because it's a really nice big backlit screen that preserves the colors very well. And I think each of those games is in the $5 or $6 range for the digitally on the 3DS, which I think is a very good value proposition, because all 3 of those games are great.
I wish I had more confidence that the success of Link's, or at least the supposed success of Link's Awakening, would lead Nintendo to remake those as well. But I think with the Capcom having been the developer, that's probably going to be a bit of a legal knot to untangle.
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure that they have. I'm sure that Nintendo has some level of control over the Zelda intellectual property, but they would at the very least have to acknowledge all the Capcom developers in the credits. I don't know what kind of legal issues would surround that, but I want to table that conversation for now, because I do want to bring up the future of 2D Zelda a little bit later in this podcast. But I mean, I don't think the Eagle's Tower is any of our favorite dungeons, unless Mike is about to shock me with a revelation otherwise. But there are 8 dungeons in this game, and you basically have to proceed through them in a linear manner to unlock some story locks and to find items that are required for exploring more of the island. But do any of us have a favorite dungeon that they want to bring up?
I really like Key Cavern. Key Cavern's a great dungeon, and it's not just a great dungeon; it also has a great lead up to the dungeon.
Prince Richard from For Whom the Frog Tells.
Yeah, which is a nice. Obviously, they kept everything from the original, but it's good to see him in 3D form.
Yeah,
he's so sparkly now.
Yeah, he looks more like he does on the cover art for his old game than a goofier version of Link with darker hair and pointy shoes.
But the whole lead up to it, like not doing that and then going through his backyard, which is just would be a nightmare to mow. And the castle, it's a great setup to get to the cavern, and then you do, and it's just a really good dungeon design, I think, anyway.
I don't know if I have a favorite dungeon. I think I have a favorite sequence, and it's probably an obvious one, but I do like the part where Marin's following you and will sometimes comment on stuff you do.
Well, I think that scene begins a little before that, where you need Marin to find Marin to progress in the story, and you have this really adorable sit down with her on the shore, where she where she tells you that she dreams of leaving the island and being free like a seagull when everyone else on the island doesn't even understand the concept of outside. And then there's a moment where it says, "You got Marin," and you hold her over your head like you just found 50 rupees or something.
Yes. Sort of related to that, and maybe I'm late in noticing this, but I discovered something in this playthrough that I didn't ever know in the original. When you have Bow Wow with you early on, I was just kind of walking around wherever I could get to on the map, and I never saw his interaction with the monkey before.
Oh, the monkey outside the castle?
Yeah, if you go over, if you guys know this, then you can stop me, but yeah, if you go to the monkey where you have Bow Wow with you, because you're not supposed to be there yet, or talking to him, the monkey just looks at him and is like, "Okay, hey, you want to fight, Mutt?" And they start fighting each other.
Wow, I have no idea if that's in the original Game Boy version or not, but that's pretty fascinating.
It was so funny. Bow Wow tries to bite him, and he jumps out of the way, and he just, he's taunting him, come on.
Well, that is I know that is a Japanese expression. If people fight like dogs and monkeys is almost the Japanese version of saying people fight like cats and dogs, and I only know that from manga and anime. So that's not real knowledge, but it's maybe they're just adapting that old Japanese saying. But yeah, I think they did add more interactions with Bow Wow and Marin for when they're following you in the Switch version, because I haven't seen it, but I saw I saw previews of YouTube videos, Marin commenting on new things in Switch Link's Awakening, things of that nature. But I don't actually know how many of those there are.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know there was many more.
But also, speaking of what Marin does in the story for you, this is the only Zelda game with an animal village. What's up with that? Totally normal village populated by bunnies and crocodiles and goats.
It's almost like it's a dream.
No.
This is the only Zelda game with Goombas.
Yeah. That's really just the tip of what we were going to talk about in terms of weirdness. The overall cast in this game. There's the village. There's Mr. Right is from SimCity.
Right, that's true.
There's so many just strange characters that somehow all work in this world.
And when the goat lady gives you a photo to give to Mr. Right, it's a photo of Princess Toadstool. Not the princess in this series, a princess in a different series.
Yes. Oh, you're going Toadstool now. You're going old school.
No, Toadstool rhymes with old school, so that's just how I thought about it. And Taran sort of resembles one of the Mario brothers. I'm not saying he's a Mario brother, but he does eat mushrooms and turn into raccoon.
Oh, he's totally Mario. Just what's his face on the mountain is Luigi.
Yeah.
Luigi with as much know and love of roosters.
Yes.
But this is just a really goofy game that I think that the developers inserted their own senses of humor and just absurd ideas in ways that I'm not going to say it fits together like a beautiful puzzle, but the odd bits stick out and are endearing and not annoying. Carry a flying rooster across an abyss and pastiches of Mario and Zelda and Mario and Toadstool and SimCity and For Whom the Frog Tolls characters sneaking around. The frog from the end of Super Mario 2 teaches you the third song.
Oh yes, Wart. Oh,
yeah.
Whatever his name is now.
This is basically the first Smash Brothers, really.
More or less, yeah. You have a crocodile on the beach who likes to eat canned dog food, and then I assume his cousin, who's an artist, painting a hippo.
I remember reading that the scenario designer was a big fan of Twin Peaks, and that really played into how the game got pulled together with dreams and the town and everyone being a little suspicious of Link.
And Twin Peaks airing in the early 90s, the timeline fits, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe it, and it's kind of, Zelda does have a sense of humor, but this is the first game that had, at least in my mind, had that kind of weird, quirky sense of humor that kind of started to get put into future Zelda games. Because, I mean, I love Link to the Past, but it is a pretty straight-laced game in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, compared to the nonsense that happens in, I don't know, like with a lot of the quirky villagers in the 3D Zeldas and the entire character of Tingle in later games, like that, the first 3 Zelda games are a little humorless compared to what a lot of the oddities that we think of as being part of traditional Zelda now. And this might have been the first Zelda game that allowed that really had some jokes in it.
As I understand, it's because the development team just could do whatever the hell they wanted. No one was looking over their shoulder because it was for Game Boy and nobody at Nintendo cared. So they could kind of do whatever they wanted. And sometimes when you give artists that kind of freedom, they come up with something remarkable. And sometimes they come up with absolute garbage. But in this particular case, it was a masterpiece.
And using Marin to awake a sleeping walrus that knocks itself out and flops overboard is a totally normal feeling plot point in this game, but would not have worked at all in A Link to the Past.
Yeah, that's true.
And that, gives way to goofy nonsense in future Zelda games like the game room proctor in Wind Waker that goes sploosh whenever you sink a battleship.
Yeah.
Like Zelda has a goofiness to its tone, or at least to its cast nowadays, that probably originated somewhat in Link's Awakening. I buy that.
Yeah, we were talking about how like this island doesn't really, there are so many things that stick out that don't really make sense. And like, was it Alice in Wonderland? I think it was the idea that a world just needs to be consistent in order for the audience to buy it and to buy it actually existing. And I feel like this island, everything in it feels like it should be on that island. Everything on the island makes sense within the context of that island.
And part of the context of the island is that it's a weird dream someone's having. And like weird things happen in dreams, and that makes a lot of the weirdnesses of this game, I think, more acceptable. And I've mentioned this in previous podcasts. I will suspend my disbelief so easily that it is a little ridiculous. But so I have no problem believing crazy stuff happening in a video game. But I think that this dream space, and by setting a weird tone early, allows Link's Awakening to get away with a lot in a way that's very fun and possibly carried over to other Zelda games. Let's see. We're I guess near the end game now. After you do the 8 dungeons, you go into an egg, wake the windfish using the code that you got from from reading a book with a magnifying glass that you get at the end of the trading quest.
The trading quest is an interesting mechanic in this game.
And another one that was adapted in future Zelda games.
That's true.
And you can't even go into game FAQs to check the code, because it's something like it's like one of 8 different codes, and depending on that's randomly determined at the beginning of your save file, so it's not always exactly the same direction through the final dungeon. So you need that magnifying glass in every playthrough, but and then you fight a nightmare that seems like a combination of a bunch of older Zelda bosses plus plus some of the dark matter stuff from a few Kirby games. At least to me it does. And then you wake a windfish, which is a big shiny colorful whale, and at the end of
covered in tapestries.
Yeah, covered in some kind of tattoo or some kind of mural maybe. And the windfish thanks you for your service, and you end up and you wake up on your little boat that you were at the very beginning of the game. And maybe one of the earliest cases I know of trying to complete a not the earliest case I know of, because I mean Metroid did this, but having a special condition to fulfill to see a change in the ending is if you beat the game with 0 deaths, you'll see sort of Marin fading into the background and then becoming a seagull flying free at the end, which is much more gracefully handled in the remake than in the original, where you saw sort of an awkward Marin with wings floating across the screen.
Yeah, like when I saw that on the Game Boy one, I didn't really think much of it. It's like, okay, they just put Marin over the end. I didn't know what the implication was supposed to be.
No, I think the implication is that like the spirit of Marin lives on in a seagull, perhaps, or maybe maybe Marin from the beginning was a seagull trapped in the Windfish's dream. But like it seems strange in the Game Boy version and much more sensible in the Switch version, even though it's foreshadowed equally in both versions. I just thought that it was handled very nicely in the end credits this time.
I agree, and I think the cool thing about both the opening sequence and the end sequence in this is Link is animated in his Link to the Past style, and then as soon as he's in the dream, he's in this artificial plasticky land. I like that, the difference between him being awake and him being asleep in the way the world looks.
Yeah, that's also, I think, attached to him being in a dream space. Like everything around him looks a little different, a little off in the dream space. It's like he's in his less less humanoid. He's in a less humanoid version of himself now because of the dream and because he's fitting in alongside the world. It all fits.
I think the ending to this game is, that's a great ending, but I always thought there's genuinely kind of almost a chilling moment where the Windfish thanks you, and then he starts waking up, and you start seeing
everything fade away.
The townsfolk and these people that you've gotten to know and help, and they are just vanishing, and you kind of feel like, oh, I guess I'm responsible for that.
Yeah, you're a bit of a Thanos moment, even just watching everything sort of fade away. But the Marvel spoilers, I guess. But
yeah, it was inevitable.
But it is a little chilling, but in a way, that's just the nature of dreams. Dreams are ephemeral, and sort of realizing that this island was a dream and that everyone was going to disappear but that's okay because you'll still remember Marin and you'll still remember this adventure. I don't know. I think that's just a little bit of commentary on the nature of dreams, and also just trying to make this sort of something beautiful that happened and not something that you destroyed necessarily. Is the feeling I get from it.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I just think it was a very smart move of the scenario writers to be showing like the scenes of the townspeople doing their day-to-day lives and just living their lives. The kids playing, Talon digging up mushrooms, and then just fading to white. Mm-hmm. Like that is kind of a chilling moment. Like
it's a powerful moment. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's the first game that made me cry. Yeah. I'll admit that.
I don't think I cried at this one. I've cried at video games, and I wasn't even on the Lufia 2 podcast, and I cried thinking about the ending of that game. This is such a weird Zelda game. It's not in Hyrule. There's no Zelda, but it's been a lasting fan favorite for all these decades, in spite of its weirdness and its differences. And again, I said this at the beginning of the podcast, I think it was the perfect time for a remake. It's been over 25 years, and there was almost universal enthusiasm when I heard the remake happen.
Yep.
Yeah, it's beloved.
And when was the announcement? It was maybe middle of 2018?
No, I think it was just beginning of this year.
Beginning of this year? Yeah. Okay, I know.
Yeah, it was like February or March.
Okay, I know it was after we had Zelda month, because otherwise we would have had an entire episode talking about this remake.
I think was it announced at the same time as Cadence of Hyrule?
Maybe, I don't know. For some reason, I had it in my head that it was in the second half of 2018, but I could be wrong. I'd have to do some more research. But I think the fan response to the announcement was universally enthusiastic, and the response to the remake, now that it's in the wild, is not universally enthusiastic, but pretty damn positive. And that just gladdens my heart. I have a lot of nostalgia for this game, and I thought the remake was both was fun and beautiful and respectful.
I agree. It's nice when nostalgia turns out to be real. It turns out to be justified.
Yeah,
justified. Yeah.
You feel like you have nostalgia, and then you try to re-experience it, and you feel reaffirmed instead of disappointed, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah, and it's a shame when you watch like a cartoon show you watched when you were a kid, and you're like, oh, this is dreadful. But
oh yeah,
the feeling when you watch a television show or a cartoon that you loved as a kid, and not only does it hold up, it actually is better. Like, I don't know, Gargoyles, for example, or Reboot. Like, those shows work as an adult, and I can enjoy them on a new level now.
The 3D CGI in Reboot is
First two seasons, yes. I would argue by the third season, it actually becomes watchable again.
This might get some people upset, but my version of that is watching Batman the animated series and being surprised at how good it was, and then watching the X-Men animated series, which is a few years older than Batman, and being just, I don't know, I'm less certain about this one. That X-Men opening theme song is still a banger, but the actual content of the animation is less impressive than that killer theme. Which is, maybe it's okay to let the past live in the past, but in this situation, I was happy for this link from the past to transition so beautifully into the present. This feels like good nostalgia reaffirmed, and not good nostalgia that is diminished now. This is a great game to begin with, and the remake is also great, and almost all the changes are great. My only reservations are with that Dampé side quest. That's my 15-second review, and there's a much better version of that review on the website written by you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I loved it, obviously. It might have gotten an extra point or two, maybe, if it didn't have the dungeon editor, but the reality is it was still a great game, even with it. So, I think it was a fantastic game.
Yeah.
It was such a pleasure to review it and to get thoughts down on paper that I've had ever since I was a little kid, really.
Word. And I don't know if I should mention this or not, but the complaints I've heard the most about this game are a few technical issues transitioning between screens and annoyances with the Dampé side quest, and also the price point. It's a full $60 American, which again, like how much games should cost, what makes a game worth, like do you want to translate hours into dollars, or does a short experience is that as important as a good long experience? I don't want to have that discussion now, but some people felt a little sticker shock for having a remake of a Game Boy game go for the full 60. And my brief thoughts on that are, I was going to play this game anyway, so I made the value judgment, and I have disposable income, so I bought it. Maybe that just makes me a sheep, but also I think that's just how much Switch games cost. Like the Switch is sort of uniting the Nintendo handheld and Nintendo console games that used to be on roughly separate tracks, and now they're going to make most, if not all, Switch games 60, especially the ones for big Nintendo franchises. So,
and that's Nintendo.
Yeah, exactly.
But some of it's too about that I've seen online is about the hours, because apparently there's a certain number of hours that are worth $60.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, yes, it's shorter than Breath of the Wild, but every Zelda game is shorter than Breath of the Wild. But this was a standard length for a Zelda game. Up until about Twilight Princess, they were all 10, 20 hours, depending on how much you wanted to spend with it. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't care. If it's a good game.
I think it's pretty silly to say that a game should be a certain number of hours if it costs a certain number of dollars. One of my favorite games of the whole year is Devil May Cry 5, and that game was also $60 and probably about the same length as Link's Awakening, or maybe even a little shorter. I mean,
I think there's also a perspective. That it's not just that it's a remake of a Game Boy game; it's also a top-down Zelda game. If this was a 3D remake, I don't know if they would have the same complaints about it. I think there's a certain
a game feels more expensive if it's fully realized 3D to some
yeah
people.
Yeah, it could be, yeah,
even though this is a 3D beautifully designed, beautifully rendered game.
Yeah, it's not like they reused any assets here.
And I hate to go back into some tenets of basic economics, but you can't measure how much you like something. There are no units for utility, and I think that how much you like or enjoy an experience is not something you can quantify, and as such shouldn't be attached to a specific price or value. And but people have their own opinions about that, and that's not a discussion that we need to have. But one discussion I do want to have is talking a little bit about the future of 3D and 2D Zelda. Now, oversimplifying things a little bit, we've been in a pattern of 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D. Because several years ago in 2012 or 2013, we had Link Between Worlds, and then we had Breath of the Wild, and now we have this Link's Awakening remake, and we have the possibly not completely titled yet Breath of the Wild 2 happening next, presumably.
I hear it's in development.
Yes, but and again, without really any real knowledge of the future of Zelda, I kind of like that 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D pattern a lot, because it feels like we're getting, with apologies to A Link Between Worlds, the best of both worlds. Of getting, big 3D experiences and maybe slightly lower budget but still beautiful and cool and interesting 2D experiences. Because I mean, full disclosure, Link Between Worlds might be my favorite Zelda game ever, because it's such a cool interpretation of 2D Zelda and a reinterpretation of the world of Link to the Past, which is another favorite of mine. So, do you think that Nintendo will sustain like alternating between 2D and 3D, or at least developing in both of those spaces? Or, I mean, do you think that all bets are off when Breath of the Wild 2 sells 14 million copies in its first 3 days?
I think that, I mean, I actually agree with you. I kind of like the 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D. I think it's a smart way to go about it, honoring both sides and both styles of Zelda game. I could be completely wrong about this because they probably have the next 2D game already in development, but I think that there's so much buzz right now going on about Breath of the Wild 2. I don't feel like they would want to step on that with a 2D game. I feel like they might want to build up more anticipation to Breath of the Wild 2.
Yeah. I don't. You know what? What's weird about it is that since the Game Boy, since the late '80s, Nintendo has always had a console and a handheld. So it always made sense that you'd put the 2D stuff on the handheld, but now they're all one. So
yeah, the tracks merge.
So like I could see them alternating, but yeah, I don't think it would be until after the Breath of the Wild sequel. And would it be, or unless in the meantime they suddenly port A Link Between Worlds to the Switch, which I would buy.
I would buy that too. Yeah.
And following up on that, let's assume that the game after Breath of the Wild 2 is a 2D Zelda on the Switch. Do you think it should be a remake of an older Zelda game, or a direct sequel like Link Between Worlds, or a standalone new thing? Which of those three doors do you like best?
I feel like Link Between Worlds was almost a... I mean, I don't get me wrong. I absolutely love it with you on that completely. But it was a pseudo remake of Link to the Past.
I would not call it a remake. It's a reinterpretation of that world, and they recreate parts of it wholesale, like a lot of the world map. But none of the dungeons are the same. None of the story is the same. It's a new game that reinterprets that setting. But
I absolutely agree with you. It is a new game, but it does reuse. Well, it reuses the world and it reuses the character designs, minus the pink hair, and that's not a complaint, by the way, at all.
I think I understand, but I still think that remake like Link's Awakening and reinterpretation like Link Between Worlds are two different things.
Okay,
but let's say that there's a 2D Zelda coming out after Breath of the Wild. Which of those do you like best? Remake, reinterpretation, or new standalone?
I'd like to see a remake of the first two. Because they did that with Metroid. Zero Mission made the first Metroid way more accessible and playable. Return of Samus did the same for Metroid 2. It was not like this remake for Link's Awakening. Like they added stuff and really changed it and modernized it.
They made a lot more changes in that game.
And I think Zelda 1 and 2 could both stand to get that kind of remake. I think that would be really interesting.
Mike, I think you're onto something. In fact, I think that it would be really smart for Nintendo to throw a curveball and not just go 2D, but maybe 2D side-scroller.
Like have a remake of Zelda 2 that maintains the 2D side-scroller elements?
I think it would be a cool idea. I think.
Oh, yeah. When I say remake of Zelda 2, I mean like keep it side-scrolling.
If they make that game control better, then I would actually be interested in replaying it, because that's not I have never beaten Adventure of Link, but I'm not interested in revisiting it either.
Well, I think they could really pull in. I mean, if they wanted to go from some of their other franchises, they could pull a lot of what they've learned over the last 20 years with Metroid into a remake of Zelda 2.
That is interesting. And I forget who said this, but I remember reading that Breath of the Wild is the first game that delivered on the promise of true nonlinearity since the first Zelda, because Zelda 1 does really sort of dump you into a sandbox without much direction, and Breath of the Wild preserves that true nonlinearity better than any other game that came in between those two. So a remake of Zelda 1 that's almost Breath of the Wild like in how little the game communicates to you. I guess I've used the word signposting or breadcrumbs probably 5 times in this podcast already, but I almost like making a true Zelda Dark Souls that dumps you into a world with no direction, but have that be a remake of Zelda 1. That's fascinating to me.
I think that's a really cool idea. I mean,
What?
do you remember with the Nintendo release footage of the prototype of Breath of the Wild that was in like the Zelda 1 style?
Oh shoot, I don't think I do, but I could probably dig it up if
Oh, I
if
remember
wanted
that.
to.
Like how they use the Zelda 1 style thing to like plan out their areas and stuff.
Yeah, and they used it to like test mechanics and test
Yeah.
like cutting down trees and lighting things. I mean, this is obviously probably not the route they'll go, but I think what would be really cool is if they took Legend of Zelda, like the first Legend of Zelda, and they started it off almost the exact same game, but instead of having a second quest where everything is rearranged, they open the world up even more. Like I would love to see a true retro style Legend of Zelda game to the scale of a modern Zelda game.
That would be interesting.
That is interesting. I mean, going back to the choices I made earlier, what I really would want to see is a new standalone 2D game, because I think I really value what Link's Awakening and the Oracle duo did, in like creating a really interesting new world that feels separate from 3D Zelda, but explores the mechanics of 2D Zelda a lot. I would be more interested in that than in a remake of Minish Cap or one of the Oracle games, just because I mean I've already played those, and something truly new that's in this 2D Zelda framework that I love would be really exciting. And I mean, of course, I would buy a remake of the Oracle duo because I love them, but I sort of hope that Nintendo avoids, not really a trap, but avoids the rut of just using 2D games to remake old ones.
I think you're right. And I mean, it wouldn't even make sense to... The reason why the graphic style in the Link's Awakening remake, it works so well is because it is a dream. I don't think they could take that same graphic style and like just put it on top of Seasons or Ages, and I don't feel like it would make sense.
Yeah. I don't want them to make another game that looks like Link's Awakening. I want them to do a 2D Zelda that is sort of designed and concepted from the ground up. And I know they can do that, but I really have no idea what they will do after Breath of the Wild 2, because I mean, beyond that, I don't think we have any real Zelda knowledge of what's coming next. They contracted out a Zelda game with that Cadence of Hyrule number from earlier this year, and that's exciting. Yeah. That's exciting to me. That maybe some developers outside of Nintendo will get to interpret Zelda in their way. The future of Zelda is bright and exciting. Because I mean, what's the track record? The recent track record we have is Link Between Worlds, Breath of the Wild, Cadence of Hyrule, and Link's Awakening. Those are 4 interesting, unique, cool Zelda games that are very different from each other. So I think that Zelda optimism is justified right now, and that's pretty exciting.
You know what? I'm going to take back what I said about them not wanting to stomp on the Breath of the Wild 2 hype. I genuinely think that given its presence in this game, I think they are heading towards a Zelda maker.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
That is interesting, and I think very possible because of Mario Maker existing and this Dampé side quest existing. That is a totally reasonable guess, but I don't have any. I'm not going to make a prediction. I just know that I like almost every Zelda game that I've played, and to be optimistic about the future of Zelda is very, very fair.
Agreed.
Yeah. Am I remembering wrong? Because I know their timeline for mobile games kind of like isn't what it was supposed to be. But was there not supposed to be a Zelda mobile game?
We might need an entire episode just to talk about timelines in Zelda.
No. Like real life timelines. Like they are supposed to be doing some kind of Zelda mobile game, right? I don't know what it's going to be.
Oh, I mean, probably. We already have these Fire Emblem and Animal Crossing and Mario ones, and there was a recent Mario Kart mobile game even. So I'm sure that's on the cards somewhere.
I'm curious what that will end up being.
I'm trying to figure out how they would bring this style of game over. I mean, Mario. I actually loved Mario Run. I thought it was a fun game. Yeah. I tried playing Mario Kart on my iPhone for like 15-20 minutes the other day, and it did not work for me at all.
One of my friends was playing that game for probably 45 minutes to an hour, and he said it was the hottest his iPhone had ever felt in his hand.
No.
Which is, and this is a guy who plays a lot of mobile gacha games and that ilk. So that made me concerned hearing that come from him of all people. But okay,
Yeah.
if we're talking about Mario Run and like iPhones burning our hands, maybe it's the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Mike, for making a rare appearance on the podcast. It's always nice talking to you, and thank you, Jono, for making your first Retro Encounter appearance. It was a delight meeting you and talking to you. And
Same.
Yeah, and all three of us love Zelda: Link's Awakening, so it was an easy discussion to have, at least. but I think very, very worth it because this is the most present Link's Awakening will be in the minds of Nintendo fans, in the release window of the remake. This was the perfect opportunity to have this discussion.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And thank you also to you listeners for keeping up with us for over an hour. This was a lot of fun to record, and I hope it was fun for you to listen to as well. Let's talk about the future of Retro Encounter a little bit. Next week, we're having our first episode on Grandia. That is, enough time for people to have played the recent ports of Grandia to Switch, and I think to also soon to PC if it's not already out. I'd have to check some numbers on that. But we are having 2 episodes on Grandia in the rest of October. There's going to be one other October episode that I have not totally nailed down yet. But listeners, RPG Fan has a lot of other wonderful content for you to explore, not just Retro Encounter. RPG Fan has forums, Twitter, a Facebook page, a Discord server, an Instagram page, a Twitch channel with something playing basically every day, and 2 other fine podcasts, Random Encounter and... Mike, I forgot the other podcast we host. It seems like it was a dream that I once had.
Oh, well, right now we're partnering with Phoenix Edge.
That's true.
That must be the one you're thinking of.
Phoenix
Definitely not
Edge
the music podcast.
We used to have a music podcast, and it's TBD if and when it'll return to your podcast feeds. But we are partners with Phoenix Edge, a YouTube hosted podcast hosted by Robert Hatfield, and they do a lot of good work on their podcast, especially mostly pertaining to current events. They do a lot of good work. So please leave reviews and listen to Retro Encounter, Random Encounter, Rhythm Encounter, and Phoenix Edge. If you want to give us feedback directly, the best way to do so is to email retro@rpgfan.com. You can also go to all of those RPG Fan pages that I mentioned earlier. But if you want to reach us individually, what's the best way to do so? Starting with you, Mike.
Well, actually, for the first time in ages, I'm using Twitter again. So you can
Yeah, it's a little weird.
I know, it's strange, huh? I'm at Valkyrie Studio on Twitter.
Oh, yeah, now I'm definitely living in a dream. Mike's been on Twitter for weeks. It's weird. And, Jono, what's the best way for listeners to reach you directly?
Probably Twitter as well. It's at Jono_Logan.
All right, and listeners, Twitter's probably also the easiest way to find me. I am at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs other times. I'm also Monsoon Mike on Discord and Monsoon on RPG Fans forums, which I have not posted on in probably months. So I think we did it. It's time to break out the cello and wake up from this dream.